Chapters 4 to Chapters 4 to 6. Chapter 4. Mean old Mr. Krupp. Do you see that old guy looking out the window up there? That's Mr. Krupp, the principal. Now, Mr. Krupp was the meanest, sourest old principal in the whole history of Jerome Howard's elementary school. He hated laughter and singing. He hated the sounds of children playing at recess. In fact, he hated children altogether. And guess which two children Mr. Krupp hated most of all? If you guessed George and Harold, you're right. Mr. Krupp hated George and Harold. He hated their pranks and their wisecracks. He hated their silly attitudes and their constant giggling. And he especially hated those awful Captain Underpants comic books. I'm going to get those boys one day, Mr. Krupp vowed. One day, very, very soon. Chapter 5. One day, very, very soon. Remember when I said George and Harold silly streak got them into big, big trouble once? Well, this is the story how that happened, and how some huge pranks and a little blackmail turned their principal into the coolest superhero of all time. It was the day of the big football game between the Howard Knuckleheads and the Steubenville Stinkbugs. The bleachers were filled with fans. The cheerleaders ran onto the field and shook their pom-poms over their heads. A fine black dust drifted over their heads. A fine black dust drifted out of their pom-poms and settled all around them. "Give me a K!" shouted the cheerleaders. "K!" repeated the fans. "Give me an N!" shouted the cheerleaders. "N!" repeated the fans. "Give me an achoo!" sneezed the cheerleaders. Achoo! repeated the fans. Achoo! 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 The cheerleaders sneezed and sneezed and sneezed some more. They couldn't stop sneezing. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody sprinkled black pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms. I wonder who did that," asked another fan. The cheerleaders stumbled off the field, sneezing and dripping with mucus, as their marching band members took their places. But when the band began to play, steady streams of bubbles began blowing out of their instruments. Bubbles were everywhere, up and down the field. The marching band slipped and slid, leaving behind a thick trail of wet, bubbly foam. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody poured bubble bath into the marching band's instruments. I wonder who did that," asked another fan. Soon the football teams took the field. The knuckleheads kicked the ball up, up, up went the ball. Higher and higher it went. The ball sailed into the clouds and kept on going right until nobody could see it anymore. "Hey!" shouted a fan in the bleachers. "Somebody filled the ball with helium." "I wonder who did that," asked another fan. But the missing ball didn't make any difference, because at the moment, the knuckleheads were rolling around the field, scratching and itching like crazy. "Hey!" shouted the coach. "Somebody replaced our deep heating muscle rub lotion with Mr. Prankster's extra scratchy itching cream." "We wonder who did that," shouted the fans in the bleachers. The whole afternoon went out much the same way, with people shouting everything from, "Hey, somebody put sea monkeys in the lemonade," to, "Hey, somebody glued all the bathroom doors shut." Before long, most of the fans in the bleachers had gotten up and left. The big game had been forfeited, and everyone in the entire school was miserable. The sign says, "Boy, do our feet smell bad." Everyone, that is, except for two giggling boys crouching in the shadows behind the bleachers. "Those are our best pranks yet," laughed Harold. "Yep," chuckled George. They'll be hard to top, that's for sure." "I hope we don't get busted for this," said Harold. "Don't worry," said George. we covered our tracks really, really well. There's no way we'll get busted. Chapter 6, Busted. The next day at school, an announcement came over the loudspeakers. George Beard and Harold Hutchkins, please report to the Principal Krupp's office at once. Uh-oh, said Harold. I don't like the sound of that. Don't worry, said George. They can't prove anything. George and Harold entered Principal Krupp's office and sat down on the chairs in front of the desk. The two boys had been in this office together countless times before. But this time was different. Mr. Krupp was smiling. As long as George and Harold had known Mr. Krupp, they had never, ever seen him smile. Mr. Krupp knew something. I didn't see you boys at the big game yesterday, said Mr. Krupp. Oh, no, said George. We weren't feeling well. Yeah, Harold stammered nervously. We went home. Aw, that's too bad, said Principal Krupp. You boys missed a good game. George and Harold quickly glanced at each other, gulped, and tried hard not to look guilty. Lucky for you, I have a videotape of the whole thing, Mr. Krupp said. He turned on the television in the corner and pressed a play button on the VCR. A black and white image appeared on the TV screen. It was an overhead shot of George and Harold sprinkling pepper into the cheerleaders' pom-poms. Next came a shot of George and Harold pouring liquid bubble bath into the marching band's instruments. How do you like the pregame show? Asked Mr. Krupp with a devilish grin. George eyed the television screen in terror. He couldn't answer. Harold's eyes were glued to the floor. He couldn't look. The tape went on, revealing all of George and Harold's behind-the-scenes antics. By now, both boys were eyeing the floor, scrimmering nervously and dripping with sweat, and Mr. Krupp turned off the TV. You know, he said, ever since you boys came to this school, it's been one prank after another. First you put dissected frogs in the Jell-O, salad at the parent-teacher banquet. Then you made it snow in the cafeteria. Then you rigged all of the intercoms and played Weird Al Yankovic songs full blast for 6 hours straight. For 4 long years, you two have been running amok in this school, and I've never been able to prove anything. Until now. Mr. Krupp held the videotape in his hand. I took the liberty of installing tiny video surveillance cameras all around the school. I knew I'd catch you two in the act one day. I just didn't know it'd be so easy. And that's all for today's video. Bye.